A wealthy businessman took his housekeeper to a high-stakes dinner with powerful investors, expecting her to stay quiet and out of the way. But what she did next changed everyone's perspective. This isn't just a story about business deals. It's about the unexpected power of speaking up, even when you feel out of place. How could one woman's courage transform not just an evening, but the lives of everyone involved? Stay with us for this inspiring story of dignity, wisdom, and second chances. Which city are you listening from? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more inspirational stories like this. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Morgan Estate, casting long shadows across its polished marble floors. Sarah Patterson moved quietly through the grand foyer, her experienced hands adjusting fresh flowers in a crystal vase. At 38, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that came from years of managing both high-end restaurants and, for the past 3 years, this sprawling Silicon Valley mansion. Her employer, Alexander Morgan, stood in his usual spot by the window of his home office, his silhouette sharp against the morning light. At 45, Alex had already built TechVision into one of Silicon Valley's most promising companies. His steel-grey hair and tailored suit spoke of success, but the deep furrows in his brow suggested something was troubling him. "Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of authority. "Has everyone confirmed for tonight's staff meeting?" Sarah checked her tablet, another sign of how she'd modernized the estate's management. "Yes, Mr. Morgan, though I noticed you've scheduled a business dinner for this evening as well." Alex's shoulders tensed slightly. At 6'2", he cut an imposing figure, but Sarah had worked for him long enough to recognize the signs of stress in his stance. As a widow herself, she understood loneliness when she saw it, even in successful men like Alex, who seemed to have everything. "The dinner," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "The Peterson Investment Group. They're questioning our company's direction." He turned, revealing dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "They want to see more than just profit margins. They keep talking about social responsibility and community impact." The last words came out like they left a bitter taste in his mouth. Sarah nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor. Though she was just the housekeeper, her previous experience as a restaurant manager had taught her plenty about business. Sometimes she saw things that even Alex, with all his success, seemed to miss. Little did either of them know that this ordinary morning was about to lead to an extraordinary evening, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their roles, their values, and ultimately, each other. The afternoon light had shifted to a warm, golden hue when Sarah heard rapid footsteps approaching. Alex burst into the kitchen, his usual composed demeanor notably absent. His tie was loosened, and he ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Cancel my lunch appointment," he ordered, pacing the marble floor. "And get me Janet Morrison's number from my contacts." Sarah looked up from where she was reviewing the evening's dinner preparations. "Ms. Morrison called earlier to decline tonight's dinner invitation. She mentioned a family commitment." Alex stopped pacing. "That's the 4th person who's cancelled." He checked his watch, a nervous habit. "Peterson and his investment team will be here in 4 hours, and I still don't have—" He trailed off, his eyes suddenly fixing on Sarah with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Mr. Morgan?" she asked, straightening her posture. "You used to manage the Grove, didn't you?" Before ... He gestured vaguely, referring to the time before her husband's passing. "Yes, for 8 years. It was one of San Francisco's top-rated restaurants." Alex nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "You understand business dining, protocol, social etiquette." Sarah felt a slight unease creeping in. "I do, but you'll accompany me to dinner tonight," he announced, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "I need someone—" discreet, someone who won't interfere with the negotiations. His eyes narrowed. The Petersons are pushing their social responsibility agenda. They're threatening to withdraw their investment if we don't show more community engagement. Sarah carefully set down her tablet. Mr. Morgan, I don't think... This isn't a request, Sarah. His voice softened slightly, but maintained its authority. Wear something appropriate, black or navy. Nothing flashy. Your role is simple. Be present, be quiet, and help me maintain appearances. I can't afford to lose the Petersons' investment. Before Sarah could respond, Alex's phone buzzed. He checked it and frowned. They've moved the reservation to La Maison. Be ready at 7. With that, he strode out, leaving Sarah standing in the kitchen, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. She glanced at her reflection in the window. In her 3 years as housekeeper, she had maintained clear boundaries between her professional and personal life. But now, those lines were about to blur in ways she never expected. As she thought about the dinner ahead, a mix of emotions washed over her. Uncertainty, yes, but also something else. A familiar spark of determination she hadn't felt since her restaurant days. If Alex Morgan wanted her to attend this dinner, she would. But perhaps not quite in the way he expected. La Maison glowed like a jewel in the evening light, its French windows casting warm rectangles onto the sidewalk. Sarah arrived precisely at 7, wearing a simple but elegant navy sheath dress, a remnant from her restaurant management days. She touched the pearl necklace at her throat, her late husband's last gift, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Alex was waiting by the entrance, his expression shifting from impatience to surprise as she approached. For a brief moment, he seemed to see her differently, not as his housekeeper, but as someone else entirely. The moment passed quickly. "Remember," he muttered as they walked in, "you're here to be discreet. I understand, Mr. Morgan." The maitre d' led them to a private dining room where 3 people were already seated. Catherine Peterson, the investment group's director, was immediately recognizable from her photos, a distinguished woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. Her colleagues, James Chen and Michael Abbott, flanked her like seasoned advisors. "Alex?" Catherine rose, her smile polite but reserved. "And this is—" "Sarah Patterson," Alex replied curtly, pulling out a chair. "She's accompanying me tonight." Sarah noticed the subtle exchanges of glances between the investors. She recognized that look. She'd seen it countless times in her restaurant days, when guests made assumptions about others based on their perceived status. The first course arrived with discussion about market projections and quarterly reports. Sarah stayed quiet, observing. Catherine Peterson's questions were precise, always circling back to one theme: community impact. "Your profit margins are impressive, Alex," Catherine noted, setting down her wine glass. "But in today's world, that's not enough. What is TechVision doing to make a real difference?" Alex launched into a rehearsed speech about charitable donations, but Sarah could see Catherine's interest waning. Without thinking, she reached for her water glass, accidentally brushing against the bread basket. As she steadied it, Catherine turned to her. "What's your perspective on this, Ms. Patterson? You've been very quiet." Alex stiffened beside her. Sarah felt his warning glance, but something inside her, perhaps the years of watching businesses succeed and fail at the Grove, or maybe the wisdom gained from her own life's hardships, made her speak. "You know," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I've observed that true community impact isn't about grand gestures or one-time donations. It's about sustainable change." She thought about the local youth centre near her old restaurant, now closed. It's about understanding what the community actually needs, not what we think it needs. The room fell silent. Catherine leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Go on." "For instance," Sarah continued, warming to her subject. Instead of just donating to job training programs, why not create apprenticeships within TechVision itself? Partner with local schools, mentor students, create real pathways to success. She thought of her own journey from waitress to restaurant manager. Sometimes the biggest impact comes from giving people not just resources, but real opportunities. James Chen nodded appreciatively. Michael Abbott was taking notes. But it was Catherine's expression that mattered. She was looking at Sarah with newfound respect. Alex sat frozen, his knuckles white around his fork. The simple dinner he'd planned had veered dramatically off course, but Catherine Peterson was smiling, really smiling, for the first time that evening. Now that, Catherine said, is exactly the kind of thinking we've been looking for. She turned to Alex. You never mentioned your company had someone with such a clear vision for community engagement. Sarah felt Alex's tension beside her. She knew she'd gone far beyond her assigned role of staying quiet and looking decorative. But as Catherine began enthusiastically discussing implementation possibilities, Sarah realized there was no going back. This dinner had become a turning point, though whether for better or worse, she wasn't yet sure. What she did know was that she'd found her voice again after all these years. And surprisingly, people were listening. The ride back to Morgan Estate was suffocating in its silence. Sarah watched the city lights blur past her window, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. Beside her, Alex's jaw was set in a rigid line that promised a storm was coming. The moment they stepped into his study, he exploded. What were you thinking? Alex's voice was low but sharp as steel. I gave you one simple instruction, to be quiet and discreet. Instead, you turned this into some sort of social justice platform. Sarah stood her ground, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The investors were asking about community impact. I simply shared my perspective. Your perspective? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're my housekeeper, Sarah. I didn't bring you there to share perspectives. You embarrassed me in front of the Petersons. Embarrassed you? Sarah felt a flash of indignation. Mrs. Peterson seemed quite interested in what I had to say about sustainable community involvement. That's exactly the problem. Alex slammed his hand on his desk, making the pen holder rattle. You were supposed to be invisible, not steal the show with your restaurant stories and community theories. Sarah lifted her chin slightly. Sometimes the best insights come from unexpected places, Mr. Morgan. Your investors were looking for authentic commitment to social responsibility, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. His face darkened. Well, congratulations. Your authentic commitment just cost you your job. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her stomach drop, but kept her expression neutral. I see. Pack your things tonight. I'll have HR send your final paycheck. He turned away, dismissing her. And Sarah? The next time you want to play business consultant, remember your place. Just then, Alex's phone buzzed. His face changed as he read the message, and Sarah caught a glimpse of Catherine Peterson's name on the screen. She turned to leave, dignity intact, when another buzz stopped her. Wait. Alex's voice was strained. He looked up from his phone, face pale. Catherine Peterson wants to meet with you, alone, tomorrow morning. Sarah paused at the door, allowing herself a small smile. Should I wear something discreet? She closed the door quietly behind her, leaving Alex standing in his study, surrounded by all his success, but somehow looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. In her small apartment above the garage, Sarah began packing her belongings. 3 years of life at Morgan Estate fit into 2 suitcases, clothes, books, and a few precious photographs. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded her navy dress, but her mind was clear. She'd known speaking up might cost her job, but staying silent, would have cost her something far more valuable: her self-respect. Her phone chimed with an email from Catherine Peterson. "Dear Miss Patterson, your insights tonight were exactly what we've been looking for. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you tomorrow at 9 a.m. at my office. Your understanding of genuine community impact is refreshing and valuable. Best regards, Catherine Peterson, Chief Investment Officer, Peterson, Social Impact Group." Sarah sat on her bed, reading the email twice. 3 years ago, when she'd taken this job after her husband's death, she thought she was just finding a way to survive. Now, somehow, she'd found her voice again. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But tonight, as she looked out her window at the brilliant Silicon Valley lights, Sarah Patterson knew one thing for certain. Sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding something better. The Peterson Group's offices were a stark contrast to Morgan Estate. Instead of cold marble and imposing artwork, the walls featured photographs of community projects and sustainable initiatives. Sarah sat in the reception area, her resume in her lap, though her strongest qualifications weren't on paper. "Ms. Patterson?" Catherine Peterson emerged, extending her hand warmly. "Or may I call you Sarah? Please come in." Catherine's office was surprisingly cozy, with a view of a community garden her firm had helped establish. "That restaurant you mentioned last night, the Grove, I used to dine there often," Catherine began, settling into her chair. "The way you transformed it from a struggling bistro into a community cornerstone was remarkable, especially your youth employment program." Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew?" "I make it my business to know people's stories, Sarah. That's why last night was so interesting. While Alex Morgan was throwing around numbers, you were talking about real impact." Catherine leaned forward. "How would you like to do that on a larger scale?" "I'm not sure I understand." "We're creating a new position, Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, full program development and implementation, real community engagement, not just window dressing." Catherine's eyes sparkled. "And I want you to take it." Sarah felt her heart skip. "But I'm just a former successful restaurant manager who turned a business around while creating genuine community value. Someone who understands both business operations and social impact." Catherine smiled. "Don't let Alex Morgan's limited vision define you." Over the next hour, they discussed salary, responsibilities, and vision. By the time Sarah left the office, she had a new job, a team to build, and a chance to make the kind of difference she'd always dreamed about. 6 months later, Sarah's community initiative program was making headlines in local business journals. Her team had launched 3 successful projects: a technology training program for underprivileged youth, a small business incubator, and a senior digital literacy initiative. Meanwhile, TechVision was struggling. Without the Peterson Group's investment, Alex's company faced increasing scrutiny over its lack of social engagement. Other investors began asking uncomfortable questions about community impact, questions he couldn't answer with profit margins alone. Sarah watched it unfold from a distance, focusing on her own work. But one morning, reading about TechVision's latest setback in the business section, she felt a twinge of something. Not satisfaction, but understanding. Sometimes success wasn't about the highest profits or the grandest office. Sometimes it was about remembering the human element in business. Her assistant popped in. "Sarah, the youth coding program graduation is starting. They're asking for you." Sarah smiled, setting down the paper. In the photo, Alex looked tired, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. She hoped he'd learn what she had long ago, that true success meant lifting others as you climbed. "Coming," she said, straightening her jacket. She had a different kind of business to attend to, the kind that changed lives, one person at a time. 1 year after that fateful dinner, Alex Morgan stood in his now quiet office, staring at the morning headlines on his tablet. Tech Vision faces major investor exodus, CEO under pressure. The sunlight that once made him feel powerful now seemed to mock his solitude. His phone buzzed, another board member demanding answers. Alex ignored it, instead focusing on the email he'd been avoiding for days. Urgent. Partnership proposal. Peterson Group Community Initiative. From Catherine Peterson. Required attendance. Alexander Morgan. Sarah Patterson. The thought of facing Sarah again made his stomach clench. But with his company bleeding investors and his board threatening to replace him, he had no choice. The Peterson Group's support could save TechVision, even if it meant swallowing his pride. The community center was nothing like the sleek corporate environments Alex was used to. Children's artwork decorated the walls, and the air smelled of coffee and hope. He felt out of place in his $1,000 suit. Mr. Morgan. Sarah's voice was professional, showing no trace of their past. She'd changed, not just in her confident stance and polished appearance, but in the way people around her moved with purpose and respect. Sarah. He managed, then corrected himself. Ms. Patterson. Follow me. She led him through the building, explaining as they walked. This center serves over 200 families weekly. We're expanding our tech education program, which is why Catherine thought TechVision might be interested in a partnership. A teenage girl rushed up to Sarah. Ms. P, I got accepted to the coding boot camp. Sarah's face lit up. That's wonderful, Maria. See, I told you those extra practice sessions would pay off. Alex watched the interaction, something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. When was the last time anyone had looked at him with such genuine appreciation? In the conference room, Sarah laid out the proposal. TechVision would provide technical expertise and internship opportunities. In return, they'd gain partnership with the Peterson Group and genuine community involvement that could attract new investors. Your board has already expressed interest, Sarah noted, sliding over some documents. They seem quite eager to change TechVision's public image. Alex felt a flash of his old anger. So this is revenge? Watching me crawl back for help? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Not everything is about you, Mr. Morgan. This program could change lives. Real lives, not just stock prices. Before he could respond, noise erupted from the hallway. They stepped out to find an elderly man had collapsed during his computer class. Without hesitation, Sarah took charge, calling for help, comforting the man, coordinating with staff. Alex stood back, watching her transform from business professional to compassionate leader in seconds. Ed's been coming here for months, she explained later after the paramedics had gone. He's learning computers so he can video chat with his grandchildren. Every person here has a story, Mr. Morgan. That's what you never understood about community impact. It's not about metrics, it's about people. Alex sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I used to know that, he admitted quietly. When I started TechVision, it was about creating something meaningful. Somewhere along the way, I forgot. Sarah studied him for a moment. It's not too late to remember. He looked around the center, at the seniors learning tablet basics, teenagers coding, and staff members who clearly loved their work. His company's sleek offices suddenly seemed empty in comparison. Show me, he said finally. Show me what real impact looks like. Sarah's surprise was visible, but she nodded. We start volunteer orientation at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Wear something casual. We're painting the youth room. As Alex left the center, his phone buzzed again with board messages and crisis alerts. But for the first time in months, he felt something different. Not the weight of failure, but the possibility of redemption. Sometimes, he realized, you have to lose your way completely to find a better path. And sometimes that path leads you right back to the person you wronged, who turns out to be the teacher you needed all along. The next few weeks transformed Alex Morgan in ways no one expected. Gone were the designer suits, replaced by casual clothes, often spattered with paint or dirt from community projects. The CEO, who once commanded boardrooms from behind mahogany desks, now spent his Saturdays teaching basic coding to seniors. "Remember, Mrs. Chen," he found himself explaining one morning, "the video chat icon looks like a little camera." The elderly woman's face lit up when her granddaughter's image appeared on screen, and Alex felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the simple joy of helping someone. Sarah watched these changes from a careful distance, offering guidance when needed, but letting Alex find his own way. Today, she found him in the center's small kitchen, making coffee after a youth mentoring session. "Your student seems impressed," she noted, reaching for a mug. "Tommy's never stayed focused for a full hour before." Alex smiled, an expression that came more naturally now. "He reminds me of myself at that age. All that energy, just needing the right direction." He paused, stirring his coffee. "I used to think success meant having the biggest office in Silicon Valley. But Tommy got more excited about coding a simple game than I've been about any merger deal." "That's what real impact feels like," Sarah said softly. "It's not about quarterly reports. It's about changing lives," Alex finished. "I'm starting to understand that now." Later that afternoon, they sat reviewing plans for expanding the youth program. The dynamic between them had shifted, no longer employer and housekeeper, but something closer to equals. "Your board meeting is tomorrow," Sarah reminded him. "Are you ready?" Alex nodded, running a hand through his hair, now slightly grayer, but somehow making him look more approachable. "For the first time, I'll be presenting more than just profits. We've got real stories, real results." He looked at her. "I couldn't have done this without you, Sarah." "You just needed to remember why you started Tech Vision in the first place," she replied. "Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of our better selves." A commotion outside drew their attention. One of the teenage students was arguing with a volunteer, frustrated with a coding problem. Before Sarah could intervene, Alex was already moving. "Hey, Marcus," he called out, his voice calm and understanding. "Let's look at this together. Sometimes the best solutions come when we step back and ask for help." Sarah watched as Alex sat with the boy, patiently walking through the problem. The arrogant CEO she'd known would have delegated this task. This Alex, the one who listened, who got his hands dirty, who saw people instead of profits, was someone entirely different. "You've changed," she said later, as they locked up the center. Alex considered this. "I had a good teacher," he replied, giving her a meaningful look. "Someone who wasn't afraid to show me hard truths, even when it cost her everything." "Not everything," Sarah corrected. "Sometimes losing what you think you need leads you to what you're meant to find." As they walked to their cars, the setting sun painted Silicon Valley's skyline in gold. The tech empire Alex had built still stood tall among those buildings, but now he saw it differently, not as a monument to personal success, but as a tool for creating real change. "Sarah," he called as she reached her car. "Thank you. Not just for the guidance, but for having the courage to speak up that night at dinner. You didn't just save my company. You helped me find my purpose again." She smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. "That's what good mentors do, Mr. Morgan. We don't just teach. We help others rediscover their own light." As Alex drove home that evening, his thoughts weren't on the next day's board meeting or stock prices. Instead, he remembered Tommy's proud grin after coding his first game, Mrs. Chen's tears of joy seeing her granddaughter, and Marcus's breakthrough moment. He realized that true leadership wasn't about being at the top. It was about lifting others up along the way. And somewhere along this journey of redemption, he'd found something he never expected. Not just a mentor in Sarah, but a chance to become the person he was always meant to be. The autumn breeze carried the sound of laughter from the community centre's courtyard, where Tech Vision's annual tech fair was in full swing. Alex stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as his employees, once focused solely on profit margins, now enthusiastically taught coding basics to neighborhood kids. "Your board members seem impressed," Sarah commented, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, their fingers brushing briefly. "They should be. Our community engagement program has attracted more investors than our last 3 product launches combined." Alex smiled, watching a young girl demonstrate her newly created app to an amazed group of seniors. Though that's not what makes me proud anymore. The change in Tech Vision over the past year had been remarkable. Under Alex's new leadership, the company had transformed its business model. Every product launch now included a community impact component. Their youth coding program graduates were being hired by top tech firms, including Tech Vision itself. "Catherine's coming to the board meeting next week," Sarah mentioned casually. "She's interested in expanding our partnership." Alex nodded, noting how naturally Sarah said "our." The boundaries between Tech Vision and the community centre had blurred, much like the lines between them. These days, their collaboration felt effortless. 2 leaders working together toward a shared vision. "I have something to show you," he said suddenly. "Do you have a minute?" He led her to his office, no longer the intimidating space it once was. Photos of community events now hung alongside business awards. On his desk sat a framed picture from their first youth program graduation. Alex pulled up a presentation on his screen. "It's our 5-year sustainability plan. I wanted your input before showing the board." Sarah leaned in to look, acutely aware of his presence beside her. The plan was ambitious, yet grounded, exactly like the man Alex had become. Each initiative balanced business growth with community impact, profit with purpose. "This is incredible," she said softly. "You've really embraced this new direction." "I had an excellent teacher." His voice was quiet, sincere. "Someone who showed me that true success isn't about power, it's about purpose." Their eyes met, and the moment stretched between them. So much had changed since that dinner a year ago. Alex was no longer the arrogant CEO who saw people as tools for success. Sarah was no longer the housekeeper hiding her wisdom behind a professional mask. The spell broke as Alex's phone buzzed, a message from a student in their mentoring program. "Tommy got the internship," he announced, grinning. "He starts next month." Sarah watched as Alex immediately began typing a congratulatory response. This was the man she'd always seen glimpses of, now fully revealed, passionate, caring, dedicated to making a difference. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I first started working with you, I thought my job was to teach you about community impact, but you've taken it further than I ever imagined." Alex set down his phone, turning to face her. Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being about saving the company. It became about building something meaningful. He paused, gathering courage. "Sarah, A knock at the door interrupted them. "Mr. Morgan, the coding demonstration is about to start." The moment passed, but something had shifted. As they walked back to the fair together, their shoulders occasionally brushing, both felt the weight of words unsaid. In the courtyard, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows as students showcased their projects. Alex and Sarah moved through the crowd together, their natural synchronization obvious to everyone watching. They had become more than CEO and advisor, more than former employer and employee. They had become partners in the truest sense, Two people who brought out the best in each other, who shared a vision of what business could be, what impact really meant. And perhaps, though neither was quite ready to admit it, something even more meaningful was growing between them. Something that had started with a dinner, strengthened through adversity, and blossomed in the shared joy of changing lives together. The evening after the tech fair, Sarah found herself alone in the community centre, organising next week's schedules. The building was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers and the distant city lights twinkling through the windows. A knock at the door made her look up. Alex stood there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking more comfortable in his casual state than he ever had in his expensive suits. "I thought I might find you here," he said, stepping inside. "Just finishing up some paperwork," she explained, though they both knew she could have done this at home. "I never properly thanked you," he said, moving closer. "Not just for today's success, but for everything, for having the courage to speak up at that dinner, for showing me what real leadership means." Sarah set down her pen. "You did all the hard work yourself, Alex." It was the first time she'd used his first name, and the sound of it hung in the air between them. "Did you ever imagine," he asked softly, "that firing me would lead to all of this?" She smiled. "You didn't fire me. You set me free. Sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destination." Alex moved to the window, looking out at the city. "I was so lost in my own success, I couldn't see what really mattered. Money, power, status. None of it meant anything without purpose." He turned to face her. "Without heart." Sarah stood, drawn to the vulnerability in his voice. "And now?" "Now I understand that true success isn't measured in dollars or stock prices. It's measured in lives changed, in communities built." He took a deep breath. "In love found in unexpected places." The word love echoed in the quiet room. Sarah felt her heart quicken as Alex stepped closer. "I fell in love with your wisdom first," he continued, his voice gentle. "Your courage to stand up for what's right. Then I fell in love with your compassion, the way you see the potential in everyone, even in a stubborn CEO who had lost his way." Sarah felt tears threatening. "Alex... "Let me finish," he said softly. "Finally, I fell in love with you, not as my former housekeeper, not as my mentor, but as the remarkable woman who changed my life, the partner I want by my side as we continue this journey." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "We've built something beautiful here," she said, looking around at the center that had become their shared dream. "Something meaningful." "And we're just getting started," Alex replied, drawing her closer. "If you'll have me as your partner, in every sense of the word." Sarah looked up at him, this man who had transformed from an arrogant CEO into someone who truly understood the value of service, of purpose, of love. "Partners," she agreed softly. Their first kiss was gentle, filled with the promise of tomorrow. Around them, the community centre stood as a testament to their shared vision, a place where success was measured not in dollars, but in lives touched and hearts changed. Months later, at their intimate wedding in the centre's courtyard, surrounded by students, seniors, and colleagues who had become family, Catherine Peterson raised a toast to Alex and Sarah, who remind us that true success isn't about climbing to the top alone, but about lifting others as you rise, and that sometimes the greatest fortune isn't found in a bank account, but in the courage to speak up, the wisdom to listen, and the heart to love. As they looked out at their gathered community, tech executives sitting beside program students, board members chatting with senior citizens, Alex squeezed Sarah's hand. They had created something remarkable together, a business model that proved profit and purpose could coexist, a community that bridged social divides, and a love story that began with a dinner that changed everything. "Ready for our next chapter?" Sarah whispered. Alex smiled, thinking of all their plans for expanding their impact, reaching more communities, changing more lives. "With you?" "Always," because they had discovered the greatest truth of all, that real success isn't about what you achieve, but about who you become along the way. And sometimes the most precious things in life come disguised as our greatest challenges, waiting to transform us into who we were always meant to be. The story of Alex Morgan and Sarah Patterson became more than just a Silicon Valley success tale. It evolved into a testament to the transformative power of purpose-driven leadership and authentic love. TechVision's revolutionary approach to combining profit with social impact set new standards in the tech industry. Their community programs, now replicated across the country, created pathways of opportunity for thousands. The company's stock value soared, not despite their community focus, but because of it, proving that doing good and doing well could go hand in hand. But beyond the business metrics and accolades, the real success story lay in the lives they touched. Tommy, their first coding student, became TechVision's youngest project manager. Mrs. Chen now teaches other seniors how to connect with their families through technology. The community center expanded into a network of innovation hubs, each combining technology education with social impact. At home, Alex and Sarah built a life that reflected their shared values. Their marriage became a partnership in the truest sense, supporting each other's dreams while never losing sight of their mission to serve others. When asked about their journey in a rare joint interview, Sarah smiled and shared their guiding principle. Success isn't about reaching the top alone. It's about lifting others as you climb. Alex, holding her hand, added, "Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our biggest challenges." That dinner changed everything, not just because Sarah had the courage to speak up, but because I finally learned to listen. Their story serves as a reminder that true transformation often begins with a single moment of courage, that love can grow in the most unexpected places, and that real success isn't measured by what you have, but by the lives you change along the way. As for that famous dinner that started it all, it's now an annual tradition at TechVision, but with a twist. Every year, employees at all levels are encouraged to speak up, share their visions, and challenge the status quo. Because sometimes the most valuable insights come from the voices we least expect to hear. In the end, this isn't just a story about a millionaire and his housekeeper. It's a story about rediscovering purpose, about the courage to speak truth to power, and about how love and leadership can transform not just two people, but an entire community. After all, sometimes the greatest success stories begin with someone brave enough to break the silence. Thank you for taking time to witness this story with us. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Every story we share is meant to move and transform. If you found inspiration in today's tale, simply leave a 9 below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Until our next story unfolds.